At 72 years old, I thought I'd lived through every kind of betrayal life could hand a man. Recessions that nearly ruined my engineering firm. Hurricanes that collapsed bridges I had poured my sweat into. And the worst storm of all the day, cancer, stole my Mary after 46 years of marriage. But nothing, not even death itself, prepared me for the words that came out of my own son's mouth that night. "Dad," Evan said, pushing the leather-bound menu away like it disgusted him. "The yacht package for the Bahamas is $12,000 a head. If you can't afford it, you should just stay home." Those words didn't come from a stranger. They came from the boy I had carried on my shoulders through Charleston's summer fairs. The boy whose first car I bought with overtime, pay the man I thought would one day honor the values his mother and I lived by. My name is Arthur Beckett, and I am 72 years old. For more than 4 decades, I was a civil engineer, the kind of man who turned blueprints into steel and concrete, who built bridges strong enough to carry families across rivers and highways that still hum with traffic today. I retired modestly but comfortably, thinking the last stretch of my life would be about fishing trips, family dinners, and quiet evenings with Mary. When she passed, I told myself my job was simple: keep her memory alive and look after our only son, Evan. That's what she whispered in her final days. "Take care of him, Arthur. He'll need guidance without me." And I did. College tuition. The down payment on his first condo. Even small things, a new set of tires when his credit card maxed out, or covering medical bills when he and his wife couldn't quite manage. I gave and gave and gave, never once tallying the cost. Because that's what fathers do. Only 2 days before this dinner, I had handed Evan a check for $80,000. That wasn't pocket money. It came from pawning Mary's antique pearl necklace, selling 2 of my prized Omega watches, and pulling from an emergency fund I swore I'd save for health care. Evan told me he was drowning in mortgage payments. My heart couldn't stand the thought of him losing his home, and yet here I sat, across a linen-draped table at Charleston's most expensive seafood restaurant, being told I wasn't even good enough to join a vacation I had unknowingly financed. Sienna, his wife, gave a brittle laugh. "It's nothing personal, Arthur. We just want this to be our time. A second honeymoon, if you will. And honestly, these trips can be tiring for, elderly people. Elderly." The word hit me harder than the check I had just sacrificed. I still swam laps every morning. I still climbed ladders to patch my own roof. I still felt Mary's spirit when I tended the rose bushes she had planted out back. 72 wasn't 90. I wasn't feeble. But in their eyes, I was nothing more than extra baggage. Around us, the restaurant was alive with warmth. Families toasting anniversaries, couples sharing laughter, children sneaking bites of dessert. And there I was, alone at a table with 2 people I had loved more than myself, realizing they saw me not as a father, not as family, but as a wallet with a heartbeat. I folded my napkin neatly the way Mary always reminded me to do, slid a few bills under my plate, enough to cover every dish, and a generous tip, and stood. "Enjoy your dinner," I said evenly. Neither of them looked up. Out in the parking lot, the salt air of Charleston clung heavy on my skin. I sat in my Buick, staring through the windshield at their silhouettes through the restaurant window. They were laughing now, heads bent together, already planning villas, designer bags, and champagne sunsets bought with money that wasn't theirs to spend. They thought I was finished. They thought the old man was too weak, too sentimental to push back. But they were wrong. If you've ever seen someone put money above family, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story. I sat in that Buick long after the taillights of other cars disappeared into the humid Charleston night. The glow from the restaurant window blurred in my eyes, not from the salt in the air, but from something heavier pressing against my chest. I could almost hear Mary's voice in the stillness, soft and steady, the way it had been when the doctors delivered her diagnosis years ago. "Arthur," she had whispered, her hand so fragile in mine, "whatever comes, don't let the world take your dignity. Keep your faith. That's what will carry you. Faith." The word lingered like a lighthouse beam across dark waters. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the small leather-bound Bible that had lived there since the funeral. Mary had underlined dozens of passages, but one in particular seemed to glow on the thin, crinkled page. "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." That night, sitting under the faint hum of a street lamp, I wasn't strong. I wasn't courageous. I was a father who had just realized the son he'd raised with love and sacrifice saw him only as a checkbook. I thought back over the decades. Evan's first apartment, when he'd called in a panic because the landlord demanded first and last month's rent. I'd wired him the money within an hour. His college years, when he changed majors twice, failed calculus and needed 2 extra semesters. I'd written the tuition checks with no hesitation. And then his wedding. Mary and I had footed the bill for the flowers, the photographer, even the custom suit he wore as he said his vows to Sienna. We did all of that with joy. Because parents want to see their children flourish. But somewhere along the way, Evan had stopped seeing our sacrifices as gifts. They had turned into expectations, obligations, debts I somehow owed him instead of the other way around. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man who looked back at me wasn't feeble. He wasn't irrelevant. He was a man who had built bridges, raised a family, and buried the love of his life with more grace than most people could summon. The tremor in my hands stilled as a quiet conviction settled in. Mary had been right. Faith wasn't about sitting in a pew on Sunday. It was about remembering who you were when the world tried to strip it away. I whispered a prayer right there in the car. Not for vengeance. Not for money, but for clarity, for the strength to know where the line was and to stand on it even if it meant standing alone. By the time I drove home, the decision was already forming in my mind. The check I'd given Evan 2 days earlier didn't have to be the end of the story. I still had resources, contacts from my years in engineering, old colleagues who had gone on to run banks, airlines, construction firms. Men and women who still remembered the times I had lent a hand when they needed it most. It wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching my son something his mother would have wanted him to learn, that respect is not bought with money, and that a father's love should never be mistaken for weakness. Back inside my house, I placed Mary's photograph on the kitchen table. She wore that blue summer dress she'd loved, smiling against the backdrop of Folly Beach. I touched the frame gently. "I'll keep my promise," I whispered. "But not like this. Not by letting him walk all over what we built together." The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Outside, the tide whispered against the riverbank. Inside, I opened my old leather address book, the one Mary had helped me organize during retirement. Pages filled with names, phone numbers, connections carefully preserved. Each one a reminder that a life of honesty and hard work left ripples long after you'd stepped back from the world. Evan and Sienna thought they were dealing with a helpless old man. They had no idea the man sitting in that Buick still had sharp teeth and a faith that would steady his hand when it came time to use them. 2 mornings later, I stood at my kitchen counter, pouring coffee into the chipped Folly Beach mug Mary had bought at a boardwalk shop 30 years ago. The house was quiet, too quiet for a man who once dreamed of grandchildren filling its halls. The silence was broken only by the buzz of my cell phone. Arthur, the voice on the other end, was familiar. Daniel Cross, an old colleague from the engineering firm now retired like me. You might want to take a look at what your boy's been posting. I frowned. Posting. I'm not much for social media myself, Daniel continued. But my granddaughter showed me something last night. Evan and his wife, what's her name, Sienna, they've been all over Instagram bragging about some big trip. My stomach tightened. Trip, I'll text you the pictures, Daniel said. Brace yourself. Seconds later, images lit up my screen. Evan and Sienna posing in front of the Grand Marina in Miami, designer luggage stacked behind them like trophies. Captions dripping with arrogance, living the dream. Success is family luxury. Bahamas bound. I scrolled my hands, trembling with something far hotter than age. Post after post, Sienna with a brand new Hermes handbag still tagged at $9,800. Evan showing off a Rolex Submariner, the caption reading, "Finally made it." A reservation confirmation proudly displayed for a Bahamas oceanfront villa, $45,000 for 2 weeks, all inclusive. Mortgage crisis, foreclosure. All lies. The $80,000 I had scraped together from Mary's jewelry from savings meant for my own care had gone straight into luxury goods and vacation deposits. I set the phone down slowly, afraid I might crush it in my palm. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the sunlight streaming through the kitchen blinds. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, and I remembered all the mornings Mary and I had stood in this very spot talking about Evan's future. She'd always believed he would find his footing, that he would grow into a man of honor. But what I saw on that phone screen wasn't honor. It was greed dressed up as success. I picked the phone back up and forced myself to scroll further. The comments were as nauseating as the posts themselves. So proud of you guys, that's the life we all dream about. Can't wait to see pictures from the yacht. And there it was, in Sienna's reply to one of her friends. We're chartering a private yacht for 4 days. $12,000 a person, but totally worth it. I nearly laughed at the irony. The very number Evan had thrown in my face at that dinner table, like a blade twisting in my chest. 12,000. He had already done the math, already knew exactly what it cost. I set the mug down hard enough that coffee sloshed over the side. It wasn't just the money. Money could be earned, lost, rebuilt. It was the deception, the entitlement. The way my son had looked at me, his own father, as though I were disposable, too old, to matter, too poor, to belong in his world of champagne and hashtags. That was the moment clarity hit me like a hammer striking steel. I thought about Mary's words about faith being the anchor in storms. This was no longer about helping Evan stay afloat. He wasn't drowning, he was diving headfirst into shallow waters of greed and dragging me with him. No. Enough was enough. I opened the old address book again, flipping through pages yellowed with age. There was Richard Lawson, a friend from my banking days, now vice president at the local branch. There was Calvin Reeves, who had gone into the yacht chartering business after his construction firm folded. Contacts, relationships. Men I had helped once upon a time, men who remembered the bridges I had built, not just from steel and concrete, but from loyalty. If Evan wanted to play games with luxury he couldn't afford, he was about to learn that his father still knew how to move pieces on the board. I closed the address book and slid it across the table. My decision was made. This wouldn't be about shouting matches or slammed doors. No. If my son wanted to learn about responsibility, I'd teach him in the language he seemed to understand best: contracts, cancellations, and consequences. He thought I was just an old man sitting quietly in a creaky house by the river. But the truth, I still had sharper tools than he'd ever imagined, and I was ready to use them. The phone screen went black in my hand, but the images were burned into my mind. Evan's smug grin beside that Rolex Sienna holding her Hermes bag as if it were a newborn child, the caption bragging about living the dream. I sat back in my kitchen chair, the old wood creaking under me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside. A line being drawn. It wasn't the money. Lord knows, over 72 years, I'd seen money come and go, sometimes more of the going than the coming. I'd worked through oil crises, recessions, even a market collapse that took half my pension. Money was a tool. What cut me to the bone was the betrayal. The way my son had looked at me in that restaurant, as if I were a relic from a past he was ashamed of. I picked up Mary's photograph again. Her smile seemed almost alive in that frame, her eyes as steady as they'd been when she sat by my hospital bed after my first heart scare. "Don't lose yourself, Arthur," she'd said. "Even when people disappoint you, keep your dignity, keep your faith." Her words steadied me. I whispered a prayer, not for Evan and Sienna's downfall, but for their awakening. Lord, open their eyes. Help them see the truth before it destroys them. And if I am to be the instrument of that lesson, give me courage to see it through. The Bible on the counter was still open from the night before. My eyes landed on the verse Mary had underlined long ago. "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" The ink of her pen had bled slightly through the page, as if she'd pressed hard when she marked it. That was Evan, chasing the whole world, risking his soul. I thought of the years I had bent over backwards to keep him safe, paying off his car when the repo man circled, covering tuition when he failed his way into another semester, quietly wiring him money after he confessed he couldn't afford rent. Each time I told myself I was honoring Mary's wish, take care of him. But I'd mistaken enabling for care. The line had been crossed the moment he looked me in the eye and called me elderly baggage. I stood, paced to the window, and looked out at the river. The tide was rolling in calm, relentless. It reminded me of engineering forces greater than us, things you can't bargain with. You build strong or you get swept away. That was the lesson Evan needed, and I intended to teach it. I returned to the table, pulled the address book closer, and flipped back to Richard Lawson's number. The man owed me a favor from 30 years ago when I'd signed off on a bridge design that saved his company from bankruptcy. I could already imagine the conversation. Stop payment. Block accounts. Quiet moves made by men who still respected loyalty. Then there was Calvin Reeves, now running luxury yacht charters out of Miami. He'd been a junior draftsman under me. Once a kid, I taught how to read stress diagrams. If I gave Calvin a call, I doubted Evan's exclusive yacht experience would survive another day. A quiet smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. This wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be messy. It would be precise and engineered solution to a son's arrogance. Before I turned in for the night, I typed one simple note into my journal. The leather-bound one Mary had given me for our 40th anniversary, May 14th. Begin teaching lessons. The path ahead was clear. Tell me something. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone you love, even when it hurt? If you're still with me to this point in my story, type 1 in the comments, so I know you understand exactly what I mean. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my plan was already unfolding in my head, as cleanly as a blueprint on an engineer's drafting table. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, set Mary's photograph at the end of the table, as I always did when I needed her steadiness, and opened the old address book once more. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. No slammed doors, no fist-pounding arguments across a dining table. Evan and Sienna thrived on drama. I knew that if I confronted them head-on, they'd twist every word into an accusation of cruelty or neglect. No. What I needed was quiet, precision, measured, deliberate, impossible to escape. I started with Richard Lawson, my old colleague from the banking days. Richard had been a nervous junior manager, once the kind of man who double-checked every decimal on a ledger. I had vouched for him when no one else would, and now decades later he was vice president at a major Charleston bank. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice deep, steady. Arthur Beckett. It's been too long. We exchanged the usual courtesies, two men who remembered each other in younger, sharper years. Then I got to the point. Richard, I need to place a stop payment order, I said evenly. Check number 4021, amount 80,000. Recipient Evan Beckett. He didn't question me. That's what I respected about Richard. He'd learned long ago that silence could be more useful than gossip. Consider it done, he said. Effective immediately. You'll receive written confirmation in the mail. Thank you, I replied. And I meant it. The first piece was in motion. Next, I flipped the page to Calvin Reeves. He'd been 22 when he joined my engineering team as a draftsman, a kid with more enthusiasm than polish. I had shown him how to read load-bearing charts, how to trust numbers over guesses. Years later, when the construction market dried up, Calvin moved south and reinvented himself in the luxury yacht charter business out of Miami. I'd kept his card out of loyalty more than expectation. Now it was time to use it. He picked up with a laugh in his voice. Arthur Beckett. I was just telling my crew yesterday about the old man who used to make me redraw beams until the ink bled through the page. How are you? Still standing, Calvin, I said. And I need a favor. I explained carefully, but without embellishment. My son had chartered one of his yachts for a trip he could not afford. Calvin grew quiet. Arthur, I respect you. You taught me half of what I know. If you say this charter is trouble, I'll cancel it before they even set foot on the dock. Clients like that don't pay, they scam, and they ruin reputations. Cancel it, I said firmly, and make sure they know why. Calvin gave a low whistle. Consider it handled. They'll get the notice this afternoon. 2 moves clean as steel cuts. I closed the address book and sat back, the morning light spilling across my kitchen table. I could almost hear Mary's voice again. Be deliberate, Arthur. Teach without cruelty, but teach firmly. What I was doing wasn't about vengeance. It was about consequence. Evan and Sienna had strutted across social media like royalty, flaunting luxuries bought with a father's sacrifices. They had forgotten that pride comes before the fall. All I had done was give the floor beneath them the slightest tilt. Gravity would do the rest. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Evan, his voice sharp with barely concealed panic. "Dad, the bank says the check bounced." What the hell is going on? We already made commitments. I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work. An hour later, a text from Sienna appeared. "Arthur, there must be some mistake. The yacht company says our reservation is void. Can you fix this? Please call them and clear things up." I didn't reply. I went out to my garden instead, trimming back the rose bushes Mary had planted years ago. The air smelled sweet, alive, unbothered by human schemes. And I thought to myself, this is how lessons are taught. Not with rage, but with boundaries. Not with shouting, but with silence. By evening, the silence was deafening for them. And for me, it was peace. That night, long after the Charleston streets had emptied, and even the cicadas had gone quiet, I found myself awake in my armchair, Mary's Bible resting heavy in my lap. The lamp cast a circle of light around me, the rest of the house swallowed in shadow. My phone still buzzed every hour with Evan's missed calls and Sienna's increasingly desperate texts. They ranged from indignant, "Dad, how could you do this? That check was ours," to manipulative, "Your wife would want you to help us. You're breaking the family apart." But I had silenced the phone. Tonight there would be no arguments. Tonight was for something else. I opened the Bible to a page I hadn't touched in years. Mary had marked it with a dried magnolia petal pressed flat and brittle with age. Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" The words rolled through me like steadying waves. For 72 years, I had believed in working hard, in keeping my word, and solving problems with my own two hands. But faith that had always been Mary's strength. She prayed at the breakfast table. She whispered scripture when the bills stacked too high. She sang hymns quietly as she folded laundry, her voice soft but unwavering. And yet here I was, years after her passing, clinging to the very words she had left me, realizing they were not weakness but steel. I bowed my head. "Lord, I've made mistakes. I've confused enabling with love. I gave and gave until my son thought it was his right, not my gift. If I'm wrong, to stand firm now, correct me. But if I'm right, give me courage to face what comes. Give me strength, not just to protect my dignity, but to teach him what Mary would have wanted him to know, that family without respect is no family at all." I sat in that silence, the kind of silence where you know you're being heard, even if no answer comes right away. And slowly the tightness in my chest eased. I closed the Bible, set it on the side table, and rose to my feet. My knees cracked, but I stood tall, because the truth was, tomorrow wouldn't be easy. Evan and Sienna weren't the kind of people to accept consequences quietly. They'd come at me with tears, with anger, with accusations sharp enough to cut a weaker man down. But I wasn't weak. Not anymore. I walked through the house, turning off the lights one by one. In the hallway, I paused at the family photos. Evan at 5 years old, his hair sticking out in every direction after a Little League game. Evan at high school graduation, his cap tilted sideways, grinning as Mary straightened his gown. Evan at his wedding, looking down at Sienna with an expression I once thought was love, but now recognized as hunger for something else. I touched the glass of each frame, whispered a promise. I will not fail you, Mary. I will not let him forget who raised him. Sleep came easier after that prayer. The next morning, I woke before dawn and pulled on a clean shirt, the one Mary had once said made me look distinguished. I brewed coffee, buttered toast, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. On the page, I began outlining the next steps. Tidy like drafting a bridge design. Confirm stop payment with Richard. Call Calvin to ensure yacht cancellation is irreversible. Review insurance and retirement accounts. Tighten boundaries. Prepare for confrontation. As the sun rose over the river, its light spilled across the page, turning the ink golden. It felt like confirmation. I thought about what faith really means, not waiting for miracles to fall from the sky, but trusting that when you stand your ground for the right reasons, you don't stand alone. The old Arthur, the one who gave in whenever Evan cried, or Sienna pouted, was gone. What remained was a man anchored in something stronger than money or manipulation. By mid-morning I was ready. Ready for their storm. Ready to look my son in the eye and tell him no. Ready to walk through fire if I had to, knowing faith was the shield Mary had left me. Because this wasn't just about $80,000. It was about dignity. It was about legacy. And I wasn't about to lose either. By Thursday afternoon, the cracks in Evan and Sienna's perfect facade were widening into canyons. I know this not because I hovered or spied, but because when you live long enough, the truth has a way of walking itself right up to your door, sometimes carried by gossip, sometimes written across desperate voicemails. In this case, it came from both. The first sign was a voicemail left at 10:42 a.m. Evan's voice was jagged, half-controlled rage and half-panic. Dad, the bank says there's a stop order on the check. Do you realize what you've done? We had obligations. We already paid deposits. Fix this now. The second was a call from my friend Calvin in Miami. His voice carried the weariness of a man who dealt with too many entitled clients. Arthur, it's done. The Beckett reservation is canceled. I've already rebooked the yacht to another party. But you should know they didn't take it well. Screamed at my office manager, threatened lawsuits, the whole 9 yards. I thanked him, hung up, and sat quietly with my coffee. I imagined Evan pacing their sleek apartment phone in hand, veins bulging in his neck, while Sienna collapsed dramatically onto the leather couch, one manicured hand pressed to her forehead. The image wasn't far from reality. Because by evening, another old colleague's daughter, who happened to work at the same luxury boutique Sienna frequented, called to say she'd seen Sienna in the store earlier that day. Apparently, she tried to return that Hermes bag she'd flaunted online. The clerk refused because the tags were missing, and Sienna had stormed out in tears. All of it was unraveling faster than silk in a flame. Meanwhile, across town, I knew exactly what was happening in that apartment. Evan would have his laptop open screen glowing blue across his strained face, bouncing between credit card websites and loan applications. Denied flashing over and over again. His once respectable credit score now bleeding from every direction. Wells Fargo Bank of America, the local credit union, all of them had slammed doors in his face. Sienna would be on the floor, surrounded by open boxes of jewelry and designer shoes. She'd hold up a pair of $1,500 heels and sigh as if they were funeral relics. Maybe we can pawn these, she'd say. But pawn shops don't pay dreams, only hard, insulting cash. The truth about luxury is this: it doesn't cushion a fall. It makes the crash louder. Their Instagram posts, once sparkling with champagne emojis and hashtags like Turkish or enough Bahamas bound, were now millstones around their necks. Comments kept rolling in. So jealous, can't wait for yacht pics. When do you leave? Post the villa. Sienna must have stared at those words until her mascara ran. Because you can delete one comment, maybe two, but you can't erase the expectations of 50 people who all believe you're sipping cocktails on a beach you can't afford. By Friday morning, the dam broke. A neighbor of theirs, an old acquaintance from church who still sent me Christmas cards, called me with a mixture of pity and judgment in her voice. Arthur, I hate to bring gossip, but I could hear them arguing from the hallway last night. Sienna was crying, shouting about how she refuses to be humiliated, how you sabotaged their happiness. Evan yelled back that he's drowning, that he has no way out. It was awful. I thanked her kindly, hung up, and went to water Mary's roses. The petals glistened in the sunlight, each drop shining like tiny crystals. It was then I realized, collapse isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's the necessary breaking before rebuilding. By Saturday, the panic in their messages had taken on a different tone. Sienna's texts shifted from accusations. How could you betray us to bargaining? Arthur, please just reinstate half the check. We'll figure out the rest. Evan's voicemails grew quieter. His anger dulled into something heavier. Dad, I need help. We're stuck. We can't cancel without losing everything. I don't know what to do. For a moment, I almost felt the old instinct rise, the fatherly urge to rescue, to soften, to send one more check. But then I looked at Mary's Bible on the table, still open to that verse in Psalm 27. And I remembered my prayer: clarity, not cruelty. Consequence, not indulgence. I whispered, not this time. Because what Evan and Sienna were experiencing wasn't punishment. It was truth. The truth that borrowed money carries chains. The truth that social media fame is cheaper than dignity. The truth that when you treat people like stepping stones, eventually you find yourself alone with no one left to stand on. That evening, as the Charleston sky turned orange over the river, I sat on my porch with a glass of sweet tea. From here, I could hear the faint laughter of my neighbor's children chasing fireflies, the world moving on as it always does. And somewhere across town, my son sat in a darkened apartment, his life crumbling like sandcastles against the tide. I didn't rejoice in it. A father never truly rejoices in his child's pain. But I also didn't weep, because I knew this collapse was necessary. And the storm that was coming next, I was ready for it. Sunday evening, just as I was settling in with a plate of baked salmon and Mary's roses still glowing pink in the last light of day, I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I didn't have to look out the window to know who it was. The storm had arrived. A car door slammed, then another. Sienna's sharp heels struck the porch like a drumbeat of defiance. Evan's voice followed, low, tense, the way it always got when he was cornered. The doorbell rang once, then again in quick succession. I set down my fork, wiped my hands on the linen napkin Mary had embroidered years ago, and walked calmly to the door. When I opened it, Evan stood stiff jaw, clenched, his knuckles still white around his car keys. Sienna hovered just behind him, mascara smudged from tears she'd tried to conceal with another layer of powder. Dad, we need to talk, Evan said, pushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Sienna followed, her designer purse clutched in both hands like a shield. Arthur, this has gone too far. she said sharply. I closed the door behind them and gestured toward the sofa. Sit if you'd like. I just made coffee. We're not here for coffee, Evan snapped. We're here because you sabotaged us. I took my chair by the window, the same spot where I always sat with Mary when we used to watch the river. I folded my hands and waited. Sienna started first. We had everything arranged. The villa, the yacht, the flights. People are expecting photos. We can't just disappear. Do you realize how humiliating this is for us, for you, I asked evenly, or for your Instagram followers? Her cheeks flushed. It's not about that. It's about family. Families support each other. Family, I repeated, tasting the word. That's an interesting word to use considering the last family dinner we had ended with you both telling me I was too elderly to come along. That was out of context, Evan cut in quickly. We were stressed. You weren't stressed when you posed with Rolexes and handbags online, I said, my voice steady as steel. You weren't stressed when you put down a deposit on a villa with money I gave you to save your home. Evan's face reddened, his voice rising. You had no right to cancel that check. You gave it to me. Correction, I said. I offered it in good faith. Gifts can be reconsidered when the recipient proves unworthy of them. Silence filled the room. Sienna's fingers fidgeted on the clasp of her purse. Finally, she tried a new angle. Her voice softened, almost trembling. Arthur, maybe we said things we shouldn't have. We were under pressure. But your wife, Mary, she wouldn't want this. She'd want us to forgive, to move on, to stay united. That was her mistake. I stood my shadow falling across the room. Don't you dare invoke Mary to justify your greed. I said, my voice low but cutting. She taught Evan about gratitude, respect, and loyalty. Values you've both forgotten. Don't put her name in your mouth unless you're ready to live by those values. Sienna looked away, her eyes glassy. Evan shifted uneasily, but forced himself to hold my gaze. Fine, he said coldly. If you won't fix this, then don't expect to see us again. No holidays, no phone calls, no grandchildren if we ever have them. You're choosing money over family. I studied him, the man who carried my blood, but seemed like a stranger wearing my son's face. No, Evan, I said quietly. I'm choosing dignity over manipulation. I'm choosing boundaries over enabling. If that costs me your company, then so be it. The words landed like a verdict. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sienna grabbed her purse, her heels clicking hard against the floor. Evan lingered a moment longer, his shoulders sagging as if some small part of him knew this wasn't about money at all. But pride kept his mouth shut. They stormed out together, the door slamming behind them. Through the window, I watched their taillights vanish down the gravel road, twin red streaks swallowed by the night. I returned to the table, my dinner now cold. But when I picked up Mary's photograph from the mantel, I felt a calmness spread through me. The confrontation was over. The battle was not. Because Evan thought tonight was the end. But it was only the beginning of his lesson. The next 2 days passed in an odd kind of stillness. The phone calls stopped. The accusatory texts dried up. Even the neighbors who normally had something to say about everything from rose bushes to recycling bins seemed quieter when I waved from the porch. But quiet doesn't mean peace. Quiet is often just the calm before a storm breaks in a new direction. On Tuesday afternoon, the storm returned, not with shouting at my door, but with a silence so sharp it nearly cut me in half. I was packing a suitcase. The same battered Samsonite Mary and I had taken on our last trip together, a fall foliage drive through the Blue Ridge Mountains. Her favorite sweater was still folded at the bottom where she had left it. I pressed it to my face, breathing in the faint trace of lavender she'd always worn, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel grief. I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I could carry her memory with me into what I was about to do. The knock at the door came just as I zipped the case. Evan and Sienna stood there again. This time, no heels, no designer purses, no smugness. They looked worn, hollow. Evan's tie was crooked, his shirt wrinkled. Sienna's mascara was smeared from tears she hadn't bothered to fix. Dad Evan said, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. We can't fix this. We're out of money. We're out of options. We can't even face people anymore. Please, just... Please. For the first time in weeks, he didn't sound like a demanding child. He sounded like a man who'd hit rock bottom. I gestured toward the living room. They followed me in, but this time they didn't storm or posture. They sank onto the sofa like children caught in a lie too big to deny. Dad. Sienna whispered, her voice ragged. You've made your point. We were wrong. We treated you horribly. But can't you just undo it? Reinstate the check, just enough to get us back on our feet. I walked to the mantel, picked up Mary's photograph and held it so they could see her face. Do you know what she told me in her final days? I asked. Take care of him, Arthur. He'll need guidance without me. My voice hardened. She didn't say, give him everything until he drowns in his own greed. She said, guidance. And that's what I'm giving you now. I set the photograph back on the mantel, then crossed the room to the side table. From a folder, I pulled a printed confirmation page and laid it on the coffee table between us. They both leaned forward, their eyes scanning the words. Evan's lips moved as he read aloud. Presidential Suite, Oceanfront Villa, Bahamas Grand Marina Resort. Check-in May 20th, check-out June 20th. Guest Arthur Beckett. His head jerked up. Dad! What is this? Sienna's eyes widened, her mouth falling open as she whispered, That's our resort. I let the silence stretch, then spoke. Correction. It's the resort you wanted. It's the resort you tried to buy with money that wasn't yours. It's the resort I chose for myself, with my own funds. Funds I earned over 40 years of sweat and sacrifice. Funds I've saved quietly while you two chased appearances. Sienna covered her mouth. Evan slumped back, his face pale. You thought I was too old, too weak, too irrelevant to join you, I continued. You thought I was baggage. What you didn't realize is that I have every right to enjoy the fruits of my labor. More right than you. This isn't revenge, it's reclamation. I'm honoring your mother's memory by finally taking the trip we once dreamed about. You're going without us, Evan stammered. Yes, I said. And I'll be gone a full month. While I'm walking beaches and remembering Mary, you'll be here facing the debts you created. You'll be learning what it means to live without a safety net. Evan's eyes dropped to the confirmation again. I could see the moment it sank in, the yacht gone, the villa gone, the money gone, and his father, once the easiest mark, suddenly beyond reach. Dad, he whispered, almost choking. We've lost everything. No, I said softly. You've lost illusions. There's a difference. And maybe, just maybe, losing them is the best thing that could happen to you. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Sienna wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. Evan pressed his palms together like a man in prayer, but couldn't quite form the words. Finally, I stood. I leave Thursday. If you want to come back here before, then come back with humility. Not demands. Not tears meant to manipulate. Humility. If not, then don't come at all. They rose slowly, as if gravity itself had doubled. Evan opened his mouth as though to argue, then shut it. Sienna touched his arm, urging him toward the door. When the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I looked at Mary's picture one last time that night and whispered, "We finally made it, love. Maybe not the way we dreamed, but we made it." The collapse was theirs, but the redemption that belonged to me. Thursday morning broke warm and bright, the kind of May day when the river shimmered like silver and the magnolias on my street released their perfume into the air. I carried my suitcase to the front door, the old Samsonite that had traveled fewer miles than Mary and I once dreamed it would. Inside lay folded shirts, sandals, and one bright Hawaiian shirt Mary had bought me decades ago. The tags were still attached. The Uber driver texted he was 5 minutes away. I poured myself one last cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. I could almost see Mary there, her hands wrapped around her mug, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she said, "Arthur, when are you finally going to take me to the islands?" I smiled. "We're going now, love. Just a little late." Before I left, I picked up the Bible from the mantel. My thumb brushed over the magnolia petals still marking Psalm 27. I whispered a final prayer. "Lord, thank you for guiding me through this storm. Thank you for teaching me that love without boundaries isn't love at all. Watch over Evan and Sienna while I'm gone. Break their pride but not their spirit. Let them find their way back if it's your will. And keep me humble even in victory." I slipped the Bible into the outer pocket of the suitcase. Some men take sunglasses or novels for the beach. I was taking faith. At the airport, the first-class counter clerk smiled as she scanned my ticket. "Mr. Beckett, you're booked for the presidential suite at the Bahamas Grand Marina. A full month, what a treat. Special occasion honeymoon," I said quietly. 40 years late, but better late than never. She gave me a puzzled look, then softened into a smile. "Enjoy every moment, sir." I walked through security with ease, my carry-on light, my heart lighter still. The lounge greeted me with plush chairs, warm croissants, and the low hum of travelers who lived in different worlds than mine. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of someone I almost didn't recognize at first. Evan standing beyond the glass partition, his face drawn, his posture slumped. He wasn't carrying a suitcase, only an envelope in his hand. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I nodded once, slowly. Forgiveness wasn't instant, and it wasn't simple. But recognition, that was a start. He didn't try to come closer. He just turned and walked away, shoulders heavy but perhaps a little straighter than before. On the plane, I settled into seat 2A. The hum of the engines vibrated through the floor as the captain announced clear skies ahead. I opened the window shade. Charleston shrank beneath me, its church steeples and winding rivers fading into the horizon. As the clouds swallowed the view, I reached into my bag and pulled out Mary's photograph. She smiled back at me in that summer dress, her eyes as alive as ever. "We're finally going, love," I whispered. "And maybe, just maybe, we've started something even greater. Maybe our boy will finally learn A flight attendant leaned over, offering me a glass of champagne. I lifted it gently, not to toast money or victory, but to toast faith, dignity, and the woman whose memory still guided my steps. The glass clinked softly against the window. To Mary, to Faith, to new beginnings even at 72. If you believe like I do, that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let people face the consequences of their choices, then subscribe to the Brian Stories and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Faith doesn't mean rescuing, it means trusting the truth to do its work.